Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mormonish. I'm Rebecca.
And I'm Landon.
And we are very excited about our guest today. We have actually, he has been on our wish list for a while, hasn't he, Landon?
Yes, yeah. He's got the best mustache in post-Mormondom, I think.
That's right. And that's it. And of course, we're talking about Dr. Neville Rochow, and we are thrilled to have him on the program today to talk about something to do with Australia, of course. So, how would you like to introduce yourself? And we will dive into the topic.
Sure. Well, Neville Rochow, I'm a barrister and an adjunct professor, and I am really thrilled to be here. I've had an association with Church Legal Affairs for many years, and we had some 4 or 5 years ago what you might call the cliche a faith crisis when we discovered a number of things about the church that disturbed us. And we thought we would just ride out into the sunset and not say anything and just not pay tithing, not attend, and just be quiet about it all. But then I started getting a number of inquiries from media outlets about what appeared to be some tax difficulties that the church might have regarding the way it was using tithing funds in Australia. And I thought I can't really speak against the church while I'm a member. I can't give an honest opinion while I'm a member. So my wife and I had our names removed from the church so that I could be free to speak. But prior to our leaving the church, I've served as a bishop. I've served in the stake presidency. Uh, I've served a mission in Germany. My wife served a mission in Italy. We were the church's representatives to the European Union in 2016 and 2017. We worked there with the Frankfurt office in the church and directly with the area presidency and to some extent with Salt Lake as well. Uh, really taking the church's interests on questions of religious freedom for those couple of years, which we thoroughly enjoyed. We had a great time working there in Brussels and made a lot of friends both in the church, but more importantly, outside of the church where people had like interests. So I've had an interest in this type of question for some time. I've been to a number of probably 25 of the BYU symposia that they hold annually in October. I have a PhD in religious freedom, well, constitutional religious freedom in the sense of the importance of human dignity. I'm a King's Counsel, which means that I'm one of the barristers that they consider to be leaders in the profession. And yes, I've loved my life. I enjoyed most of my life in the church, but I can't be I can't stand cognitive dissonance and just had to be true to what I understood to be the correct position. And that's me in a nutshell, I guess.
And there it is. And we absolutely admire you for everything you did on the Australian tithing situation. We're going to link the program you were on into the show notes. So everybody, I mean, I'm sure you all know what we're talking about, but on the off chance that you don't, this was quite a fascinating scenario. I think I said before when we were chatting, in other countries where there are transparency laws, it seems like the church always butts up against those. Canada, Australia, and their behavior is not the best. So it does make you wonder what's happening in the places where there is no transparency. So
Yeah.
yeah. But today we're going to be talking about something. I think you can pull up our slideshow now, Landon. This has kind of been on the radar for a little while and kind of heating up. And several people have messaged me saying, you guys need to cover this. You need to talk about this and what this is and what it means as far as religious freedom, temples, even sort of, what it might have to do with our Fairview coverage, things like that. And it was the middle of the night, literally. I'm like, who can we get? And I'm like, oh, I don't even have to think any farther. And because I've never interacted with you before, but I just reached out with a message. I said, hey, how'd you like to come on and talk about this? And to my great surprise, you answered right away and said, let's do it. So we are absolutely thrilled to be talking about this topic with you.
Well, that thrill goes both ways.
That is so kind of you. So I named this something asunder down under. Yeah, sorry, that's very punny and ridiculous. With the
It's very witty.
with the subtitle Latter-day Saints Raise the Alarm. And of course, we're talking about Australia. So I have the quintessential Australia pictures to go along with this. I have the Opera House, I have a kangaroo, and I have, which temple is that? Do you know?
I think that might be the Brisbane temple.
I think it is. I think that's the
Yeah.
one I pulled up because this is the one that we're talking about that's in Queensland that there's sort of a question about. So yeah, this has to do with temples and religious freedom in Australia. So let's dive right in. And maybe some of
Sure.
you haven't really heard about this topic at all, but I know others are really kind of following it. So we'll have you read this, Landon. There's a new anti-discrimination bill that is going to replace an act that's been in place since 1991. We'll have you read this, Landon, and then we'll ask Neville if he can kind of maybe get us up to speed on what the old act was, and we'll start talking about the new one.
Okay. And we ought to just say that a barrister is a lawyer in Australia, correct? That's basically what that is.
There are two types, generally speaking, there are two types of lawyer in Australia. It's like in the UK, and New Zealand and a couple of other Commonwealth countries, but we have a division, either absolute or in practice, between barristers who are advocates to go to court or advise on difficult legal problems, and solicitors who are what you might call an attorney, although they go to court sometimes. Generally, it's the barristers that do the court work, and then the barristers are divided up between senior and junior counsel. Senior counsel are quite often designated as King's Counsel, and junior counsel is just anybody who's not King's Counsel. So basically, from their mid-20s up to their mid-80s, they can still be junior counsel if they haven't been appointed as senior or King's Counsel.
Okay. Well, I'm an embarrasser to my parents since I've left the church.
You are an embarrasser, yes, to your parents.
Yeah. As long as you don't call me a barista.
A barista, that's right. That's a fine line there, isn't it?
I get that right?
We'll get started on this. So, new anti-discrimination bill to replace the 1991 Act. On 4th of May, 2021, the Attorney General requested that the Queensland Human Rights Commission undertake a review of the Anti-Discrimination Act of 1991. This review was the first holistic consideration of the Act since its introduction and provided a valuable opportunity to ensure that Queensland's anti-discrimination laws are up to date with the changing needs of our society.
Yeah. Well, can I just first of all comment directly on that?
Yes.
Then maybe just give a little bit of background on the way that our system works. We have a federal system just like the US, but there are some qualifications. I'll go through those in a moment. But on this bill, it is at the moment a bill, which means it's not law yet. So it's been circulated for comment and for discussion. And the point to understand about this is this whole reform has been mooted and the subject of public discussion for 2 or 3 years now. It's been out there. The Queensland government has been quite transparent about, first of all, the need to, in a way, consolidate their anti-discrimination laws and also to modernise them. So there's no surprise in any of this. There should be no element of uproar about we weren't told, we didn't know. This has been around for a while. What the bill does is it consolidates a number of amendments that have been made to the 1991 Act and also reviews a number of things that need modernising. So that's the reason why they have got this omnibus act that brings together everything into one piece of legislation. It also amends another a number of other pieces of legislation relating to employment and other discriminatory areas, and it just brings it all into one shed, as it were, so that you've got one place to go for Queensland anti-discrimination laws. The other piece of legislation that needs to be borne in mind is Queensland has a Human Rights Act, which confers human rights according to UN standards upon the people of Queensland. So the two areas you would look at for law in relation to discrimination would be the Human Rights Act and also the Anti-Discrimination Act. And particularly if this bill passes, you'll just have principally those two pieces of legislation to look for rights. But that has a bit of background to it, and perhaps I can just give a little tutorial on this. I don't want to turn this into a law lecture by any means, but
no, it's good to understand. We appreciate it.
Well, I'll go through it as slowly and simply as I can, just to make sure that we're all talking from the same song sheet. But if you have any questions as I'm going along, or if I'm skipping over detail, please feel free to stop me. But
I want to just say, Neville, that because we were discussing before this happens, for people who don't know, Queensland is like a state, so this isn't a federal law in Australia. This is more like a state law. And
this is a state law. And can I make this comment about Queensland? It is different from the other states in that its legislature is what we call unicameral. All other states have what are called bicameral legislatures. They have a lower house, then an upper house, a house of review. All of them are democratically elected, but it's similar to your House of Representatives and your Senate. And federally, we also have a House of Representatives and a Senate. So having two houses of Parliament is the norm. You have the House that initiates most legislation, then the upper house that reviews it and approves it for it to become law. The Queensland Parliament is unique in that it abolished its upper house in the 1920s, and so it is the only unicameral state legislation that we have, which means that whatever the majority decides in what would be the lower house will become law. And that's something that causes alarm sometimes when there's controversial legislation, because if you can't get a number of people to vote against it in the lower house, if you can't get the numbers of members to vote against it in the lower house, the chance of review is not there. Whereas in other states, if it passes in the lower house, you can always go and lobby people in the upper house if you are a lobbyist, and particularly with respect to religious freedoms. So that's the first point to make about the structure of the legislature. And I think those who are concerned about this bill are particularly concerned because they get one shot at it. If it passes the Parliament, then it will become law. So that's just a matter of observation.
Is this a new law, or you made it sound like they're kind of taking other laws that were out there and unify them into one law? Is there anything new in this law, or is this stuff that's
there are some new elements to it? There are some new elements to it, and I'll come to those in a moment, because essentially they saw this as the opportunity to reform some areas of the law and consolidate other areas. So the 1991 Act was in place in that year, but then every now and again there would be amendments to it or changes to other laws. And so in the sense of it being a new law, yes, it is a new consolidation, but most of it comes without any surprise. Most of it comes from existing laws or areas which were known to need reform. So yes, it will be a new law, but based upon a number of older provisions and some areas of amendment which are modernising in effect. Is that a good answer to your question?
Yeah, that's what
That
I was
makes
trying to
sense.
figure out if it was.
Yep.
You know.
Yep, thank you. But just stepping back and looking at a macro view of how our constitutional structure works, we have a federal structure which we borrowed from the US in its format. Where our 1901 Constitution, the federal Constitution, has a number of elements that we borrowed from the US as a federal structure. But we also incorporated the Westminster system from the UK constitutional structure. And so we have an amalgamation of the two types of constitutional structure. So in the way that we conduct our parliamentary procedures, they are very much based on the English traditions. In the way that our laws are formatted and passed, it's very similar to the US. The one major difference would be that the third estate of our legislative program, which is the executive approval, you have the president to sign off. We have the Crown to sign off, represented usually by a governor or a governor general. The president, I would say, has more power than the king. And that's the truth of it. A president has much more power than King Charles III or any of our governors, because it seems to be the case that some presidents exercise their right to veto legislation. Vetoing of legislation by the third estate here, by a governor or a governor general, is the utmost rarity. It rarely occurs, if ever. So that would be a difference, that the Crown, represented by the governors and governor general, generally go with what the people want as represented by the parliaments, the lower house and the upper house. And so although we don't have an elected president, we do have an executive that abides by the will of the people in pretty well everything. So that's one thing. Second thing that's a little bit odd about Australia is that we have no federal constitutional Bill of Rights. We have state-based legislation in some states that confer human rights, but they are not constitutional in nature. There's no power to invalidate legislation under those acts. And I've long been a proponent of having a federal bill, not necessarily the same as the US, but based upon UN models, to confer as a matter of right the same rights upon every Australian citizen, and to give the courts a power to invalidate legislation that does not accord with human rights. That's a battle that I'll be fighting along with others for a long time, I think. But that's my view on the way the world should work. But we do have some provisions in our Constitution that confer rights, but not in the sense of a Bill of Rights. But we have nothing like the First Amendment. What we have is a provision of Section 116, which to the lay observer may appear to confer rights like under the First Amendment, but it's not been interpreted that way, and it doesn't work in the same way that the First Amendment does. So I think that's probably what needs to be said about our structure. There's a lot more that I could say, but I think that gives enough for a person listening in to say, okay, I think I know where the differences and where the analogies are. This bill, though, I do want to emphasise that it's been the subject of extensive consultation and promulgation of the draft law. It's very difficult for me to see any direct or indirect attack on religious freedom. I don't detect it in there. In fact, in many respects, I would say it's up with the modern expression of religious freedom in most legislative provisions throughout the Western world. I'd leave the United States out of it because there are some states that are the same, some states are different, and your First Amendment is not like the modern laws. But there was nothing surprising in it as I read it, and certainly I detected no direct or indirect attack on religious freedom. So I do have to ask the rhetorical question, and this is a bit philosophical, I guess, is what do we mean by religious freedom? If there's anything wrong with this, well, what do you want? What more is there that could be given than what is given in this act? So that raises a few questions, and maybe we can dive into those a little bit later. But I do say that if you stand aloof from a reform, it's a little bit on the rich side to come in just as the thing is about to be passed into law and say, oh, hang on, you haven't considered my rights. If you've been sitting there stum and aloof, not saying anything throughout an entire consultation process, then say at the last minute, well, we're not very happy about this because of X, Y, and Z, you better have very good reasons to have sat back and then complain at the last minute. And your complaints better be dead right.
Yeah, and I can't imagine that they were not following this or knew that this was happening. And so it is very interesting that suddenly there seems to be this intense interest. So I'll just read this quickly and then we'll kind of talk about it. The new anti-discrimination bill draft of 2024. It says the Queensland government sought community feedback on the draft new anti-discrimination bill 2024, the draft bill that will replace the act. The proposed new anti-discrimination law would fundamentally alter the operation of Queensland's discrimination legislation with a view of ensuring it is a modern and effective instrument that appropriately protects people from discrimination, sexual harassment, vilification, and other objectionable and lawful conduct. So this is the intent of, the draft of this bill, which sounds good, right? The purpose of the draft bill is to, and here we have bullet points, to promote and protect the rights to equality and non-discrimination, to eliminate discrimination, sexual harassment, vilification, and other unlawful conduct to the greatest extent possible, to promote and facilitate the identification and elimination of systemic causes of discrimination, sexual harassment, vilification, and victimization. Promote and facilitate voluntary compliance with the legislation and establish a flexible and efficient process for resolving complaints about alleged infringements of the legislation. So can you help us understand in layman's terms, what is this bill, which on the surface seems, this is great. What is it really trying to accomplish for Queensland?
Well, I think that second paragraph that you read that starts with the words the proposed new anti-discrimination law is accurate. That's what we're seeing. Excuse me, I've just got to have a drink here.
Let's all do it. That's right. Every time we say anti-discrimination, let's.
Yeah. But I would think, in my humble opinion, that it achieves exactly what it seeks to achieve. What it sets out to do is what this bill would do if it were passed into law. And the important thing from the religious freedom aspect is what it does and what it preserves as opposed to what it changes, because there isn't a lot that I can see that it changes from either previous Queensland law or indeed puts it out of step with other laws in other states which have never been the subject of complaint. And I just pick up something that came from the church's website. This is what Elder Mers said. He's the area president, and this is what he's reported as saying on the Church News website. I'll just read this slowly because it's fairly important, because there are 4 points that I'd like to go back to. The bill threatens the church's freedom to maintain and exercise its religion. It does not allow the church and other faith communities to decide who is and who is not a member in good standing. It does not allow the church to decide who meets the church's religious standards for entering the Brisbane Temple, an exceptionally sacred edifice where only the most faithful members go to receive religious ordinances, sacraments. Likewise, the bill would prevent the church from requiring its employees to be qualified for temple worship so that the church can pursue its religious mission with the aid of members who share the same commitment to church teachings and standards. Now, I know Elder Mers. I've got deep respect for him. He was an eminent industrialist in mining corporations before he became a general authority. He's a very intelligent man, very capable man. But I do wonder who it was that advised him that that was the effect of the bill. He's not a lawyer. I wouldn't pretend to have any legal qualifications. But he is saying here that there are certain features of this legislation that, with greatest respect to both Elder Mers and those who advise him, I struggle to find. And I would welcome anyone to correct me. I may have this entirely wrong, but I couldn't see it. And so, starting with the first proposition, that the bill threatens the church's freedom to maintain and exercise its religion. Well, I've read through the report that is the basis of this legislation, and the language is, in respect of religious freedom, either to retain existing freedoms or to expand them. I don't see the threat. Now, if someone can point that out to me, I'd welcome that and I'd correct myself, but I can't see it. In fact, recommendation 37.1 from the report says the Act should retain an exception from discrimination for the ordination, training and selection of religious leaders, and this should be broadened to include lay people who have a role which is the same as or is similar to the role of a priest, minister, or religion, or member of a religious order, or where the person otherwise has a role that involves the propagation of that faith. So that was the recommendation. And as far as I can see, Clause 29 of the draft bill, among other clauses, does exactly that. So in terms of employment, there's Clause 29. In terms of temple, sacred sites are protected with respect to discrimination under Clauses 40 and 45. The roles of lay ministry are protected under Clauses 61 and 62. With respect to accommodation that's run by a religious order, Clause 50 protects the ability to discriminate as to who goes in there. And any voluntary body that operates not for profit is able to discriminate as to who may join that body and on what conditions, and that's in Clause 39. So I may be missing something, but to be quite honest, I just can't see what it is.
Yeah, that's interesting. Go to the next slide, because I think we'll backtrack a little bit, and I agree with you. And the church has come out, and other churches, and they've raised the alarm. And what you're saying is it sounds fairly unnecessary as far as what they're doing. So our next slide says the church then takes action. And of course, I have a picture of a whole bunch of cattle there racing through the land, because the action they took is they bought up a whole bunch of farmland in Australia, right? So I don't know
like
if that's
$1 billion worth or somewhere close to that.
$300 million worth of farmland. That's the action they took right away. But then back to their concern here.
But hang on. Your slide is appropriate for another reason. There's a whole lot of sheep.
I thought of that too. I wondered if anyone would get that. That's right. So, but yeah, the church, and it's interesting that you would say this has been being discussed. This has been going on for years, and yet suddenly there it is. And so there is this part of this, I think, is what you read. The church, it was on the church's website. The church supports a multi-faith letter to Queensland Premier in defense of the freedom of religion principles. So sort of an amicus letter, a bunch of other heads of religions got together, signed something voicing their concerns. And the church, I don't believe, signed it, or perhaps was not invited to sign, but they definitely shared their support in this statement. It says, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints announced its support today of a multi-faith letter sent earlier this month to Queensland Premier Stephen Miles. The letter outlines concerns held by many churches and faith communities regarding a draft anti-discrimination bill before the Queensland Parliament. If passed into law, it would adversely impact people of faith and religious organizations. So let's go to the next slide. I think that's more of it.
Yeah,
here.
sure.
And that might be the part that you read. If we go to the next one, Landon. Yes, there we go. I think this is what you just read, right?
Yeah, well, let's go through it again because it's important.
Yeah, it is important. And I think the parts that I put in red, it says, as Neville read, the bill threatens the church's freedom to maintain and exercise its religion. It does not allow the church or other faith communities to decide who is and who is not a member in good standing, at which others may see as discrimination, right? I think that's the whole point here. I have a picture here of a bishop shaking the hand of an 8-year-old, trying to decide if she is a member in good standing at age 8. It does not allow the church to decide who meets the church's religious standards for entering the Brisbane temple. And there, I think we've gotten to the crux of their fear and their argument. If they can no longer discriminate against certain people and tell them you cannot enter the temple, then what happens? I mean, that's what it's based on, right? Some can enter, some cannot enter. And I think that right there is their fear. It's an exceptionally sacred edifice where only the most faithful church members go to receive religious ordinances, sacraments. Likewise, and here's another big part of it, the bill would prevent the church from requiring its employees to be qualified for temple worship, so that the church can pursue its religious mission with the aid of members who share the same commitment to church teachings and standards. So basically, the church is terrified that they will no longer be able to, I don't know, separate the wheat from the from the tares, and only certain people can participate in the temple, and only certain people who meet certain qualifications can be employed. Do you think, Neville, that is what the fear is? Is that what they're concerned about?
I think that is the fear, but as I said a moment ago, Rebecca, in the draft that I have before me, I can't see the basis of it.
Right.
I just cannot, and I'm just going to see if I can call up one of these provisions. I'll go to section 39, or clause 39. It's called a clause before it passes into law. Let me just see here.
I wonder why, Landon, while he's looking for this, do you think that the church would be raising this alarm if there's no need for it? Why are they so, we're being persecuted, we're being harassed. I mean, we've seen this before. We've seen this in Fairview, of course, quite a bit, and some of the other places where they're building temples.
I think the church seems to take every opportunity it can to unite its followers by using this persecution complex that, they're trying to take away our rights. We need to stand up. Everybody come together and stand up for our rights. And I think we saw this in Fairview as well, and in Lone Mountain and the others, where everyone came back and said, you're being discriminated against. They passed a law that doesn't let us do what we want, therefore you're being discriminated against. When
it's a dog whistle.
In fact, this bill has absolutely nothing to do with that, it sounds like. And based on what Neville just said, from all those acts, it sounds like there's all kinds of loopholes that allow a religion to continue to discriminate. It's weird to me how what all of us have to adhere to in our employment and in our everyday lives, religion is somehow exempt from treating those same people with dignity and respect.
Yeah, they can have a bathroom monitor, right? The handbook update, bathroom monitor for trans individuals. Try that in the workplace. No way.
Yeah, well, I mean, both of you are making superb points. Look, if you're going to legislate to stop the church from discriminating at all, there are plenty of targets in its practices that you would aim at, and you could do it very clearly just by a simple piece of legislation which says no person, whether a religious body or otherwise, will discriminate against anybody upon any basis whatsoever. Easy. And that would be a direct attack. But instead, what you have, for example, at clause 39, which deals with voluntary bodies. A voluntary body may discriminate against a person in relation to the admission of the person as a member of the body, or the provision of benefits or services to the member of the body. And voluntary body means an association or other body, whether incorporated or unincorporated, the activities of which are not engaged in for the purpose of making a profit, but does not include, then it's got a few exceptions, but they do not include religious bodies. So the church as a voluntary body has been given the right to discriminate as to who will become a member and who will gain the benefits of being a member of that body. So that's just one example that I can find where I think the opposite is true in this legislation. Let's go to clause 29, which relates to employment. Genuine occupational requirements for religious bodies. Now, I must say that this provision is in pretty standard form. If you go through European legislation, if you go through other state legislation in Australia, some of the states of the US, this is pretty carbon copy, cookie cutter stuff. A person may discriminate against another person on the basis of the other person's religious belief or religious activity in relation to work for a religious body if participation in the teaching, observance, or practice of the religion concerned is a genuine occupational requirement of the work, and the other person cannot satisfy that. I can go on, but essentially what it comes down to is this, that if being a worthy member of a particular religion is an essential to the position, then you may discriminate. If it's not essential and it's not proportionate or in any way required, then you can't discriminate. Now, that's not new. That is not new at all. And that means that the janitor, the custodian, the gardener, you can't determine those things on the basis of their religious belief or their worthiness because it's got nothing to do with your religion. Anybody can do that. In fact, most chapels in where I live, the gardeners are contractors. They're not temple recommend holders. They come in from a lawn mowing company and do the gardening, and so whether you employ them or not, they don't need a temple recommend to do that sort of work. In teaching, if a teacher is teaching religious studies or something that's core to the faith, then of course they can say you must be a religious adherent. But if they're teaching science or woodwork or metalwork or something like that, do they really have to be a church member and a member in good standing to teach those things? One would say not. So it's not really doing anything different than what is now accepted as the practice throughout the Western world with respect to discrimination.
So you're saying that already exists. That exists, what you just described, because as we'll see later in some slides, this is some of their main talking points about the discrimination of teachers and other kinds of, but this already exists, this kind of protection. That's so interesting. I remember I applied for a job once. It was not a church. It was a church related school. It was one of those like freedom, patriotism kind of schools. And I was going through the application. It was right by my house. I'm like, oh, this would be great. I'm a librarian. I'll apply to be the librarian there. And I got through the whole application. Everything was great. And then at the end, it said, must have a strong testimony and love of the Lord. And I was supposed to like check a box. So I didn't end up applying. But again, this is like a private school. It was able to say, that as a librarian, that person has to be on board with the LDS curriculum. So it is interesting.
Well, it's interesting that the legislation that is proposed would not only extend to holders of what we call the priesthood, but also to people who work in similar roles. In fact, Recommendation 38.1, which is implemented in the bill, says a general religious body exception and religious accommodation exception should be retained. In other words, this is not new. It's just being taken from the old legislation and brought into the new legislation. But should not apply to the attribute of religious belief or activity where the conduct of an organisation or related entity established for religious purposes is to conform to the religious doctrines, tenets, or beliefs, and reasonable and proportionate in all the circumstances. In other words, if the lay person or the person who's helping the church out in the church offices or whatever it might be is working to promote the mission of the church, then yes, you can require them to have a temple recommend.
So in that case, let's say they hired a custodian at the temple, he has to go inside the temple to clean it, or he or she?
Then they could require it, yes. They could require a temple recommend there.
And this is already in place. That's what's so funny. Why raise this alarm? Why throw out these words that make people worried, where they say we will no longer be able to decide who's a member in good standing, i.e. discriminate against those who drink coffee or tea or
can I just go back to the words of the recommendation as well as the words of the legislation? I won't read the legislation again, but a general religious bodies exception and religious accommodation exception could be retained. Retained. Nothing new. Then it's got a but should not apply to the attribute of religious belief or activity where the conduct by an organisational or related entity established for religious purposes is to conform to the religious doctrines and reasonable and proportionate in all the circumstances. In other words, if you need to conform with doctrines, tenets, and beliefs, and it's reasonable and proportionate, then the exception will operate.
And that makes sense.
Yeah, the way I see this, it makes sense that you can't discriminate against anyone if it's it's something they have to do. If it's public policy or public employment, stuff like that everyone in the country has to participate in, you can't discriminate against them. But you can set up an organization, and that organization, as long as it's not for profit, is free to say, here's how we decide our memberships, here's who's allowed in, here's who's not allowed in. And that to me, that makes perfect sense. You've got to let an organization say, here's our rules and here's what the kind of people we want, or here's the kind of thing that we support or stand up for. And that makes sense that you can choose that. I think in religion, you're a little bit different in that, most organizations like that you may join, you join when you're an adult and you choose to join it. You say, oh, I want to, align myself with that organization. I support that, or I support that. Whereas religion, you tend to be born into it and raised in it, but you are able to leave it. And so that's kind of the point here is if you don't like it, you can leave it. And that's maybe what you should do if you don't like how the church discriminates against people, but that they have the right to discriminate, but you also have the right to leave it if you don't agree with it.
Well put. I mean, that's very well put. Let's just consider a couple of examples. We have in my city and most Australian capital cities, uh, men's clubs and women's clubs. So they're modelled on the old English model of the club, and some clubs don't allow women in, and some women's clubs don't allow men in. Or they're saying, well, yeah, you can continue to do that. That's okay. Not okay. I mean, if they wanted to get rid of it, they just say no one can stop anyone based on their agenda from joining any club. They could do that, but they didn't. They did the opposite. They're saying if you're a voluntary organisation and you have certain criteria for being able to join this organisation, and those criteria under other circumstances would be discriminatory, we're granting you an exception. We may not like it, but we're going to let you continue to be the troglodytes that you are.
And there it is. All right, let's go to our next slide and we'll go through what some other people are concerned about here. To your point, Landon, where you said sometimes you feel like they just like to rally the members about things like this and say, hey, you may not realize it, but you're being discriminated against. There's danger, Will Rogers, right? So Landon, can you read this? It's a little too small for me, but this is a letter that was sent out to a ward by the bishopric, kind of instructing the members on how they should react and what they should do about this bill.
Yeah, it says, we've been informed by Elder Wayne Maurer and Area 70 in the Brisbane Coordinating Council that the Queensland Parliament is currently considering an anti-discrimination bill. If passed into law, it has the potential to adversely affect the church as well as other faiths. We are advised that the new legislation could limit some of the church activities, for example, the ability to decide who meets the church religious standards for entering the Brisbane Temple. Our Pacific Area President, Elder Peter Maurer, has made public comment at the attached link in bold, and then there's a link to that statement. Read more about the church's general position on religious freedom here. We are encouraged to review the proposed legislation changes, and should you feel inclined, write to our local MP or share your feelings in ways that are respectful and civil. Warm regards, Brazil First Ward Bishopric.
So again, send emails, contact people. But I mean, don't you think the church employs more lawyers than probably anyone else? I mean, any other kind of position? Don't you think that some of their herds, is that the correct? Is it herd? Is it a murder of lawyers? What is it? I don't know. Don't you think that some of them might, it's a what?
No, I was just going to say it's a murder of crows.
I know it's a murder of crows. I thought it might be a murder of lawyers. I don't know. But it seems to me that with all these lawyers, I mean, look at you. You just read through it and you're like, oh, it's no problem. No one has picked out the fact that probably everything in this letter is not a reality. It's just so interesting to me to kind of whip the members up into a frenzy about this.
Well, and look, the average member in Australia is not necessarily the most literate or articulate person on the planet, and they would take that advice and never go to the primary source. They would never do what we've done, which is go through the report recommending the legislation, the resulting bill from the legislation, and consider each of the clauses in turn to see whether they do what is said to be done. They wouldn't do that. They would just take that, the Lord's mouthpieces have spoken, so therefore let's get active on this and complain about it.
That was one of the things we saw so well demonstrated at the temple hearings at the different communities, was you saw the community members show up with references to the law. They'd done their research. They'd looked at the codes. They looked at parking. They looked at the traffic. They looked at the water issues. They looked at all of that. And then the members were just there rehashing whatever they'd been told to say and bearing their testimony that they knew the church was true, and not at all. In fact, several of the times the person running the meeting had to say, "We know you believe in your church. We understand that. Please limit your comments to the codes and the ordinances, and specifically what the building codes are here, because that's what we're trying to decide on.
Yeah. Well, can I just step back and take a macroscopic view here for a moment? What is going to be the consequence of this type of conduct where you're really crying wolf about religious freedom? Religious freedom is a very precarious right, even in the UN codes that have been set down to describe religious freedom. They say you can enjoy religious freedom except when it runs contrary to the law or the good order of society. So that's the caveat, or that's the rider that is placed upon all religious freedom rights throughout the Western world. Anyone who subscribes to the UN instruments on human rights knows that that is the case, that religious freedom has a limit and it can be regulated. Now, if you want your religious freedom to be curtailed and regulated more and more, behave like this. Start raising doubts about how you're going to exercise your religious freedom. But on that, let's just think about the times when religious freedom has been exercised in places where there is a monopoly of a particular religion. No one expects for there to be a Spanish Inquisition. There can be Spanish Inquisitions when the Catholic Church was the monopoly religion for most of the world, the Western world, for centuries. It had the power of life and death and property and movement. It exercised its religious freedom to curtail all other freedoms whenever it saw fit. Look in Muslim countries where there is an absolute majority of Muslim government. They decide that if you don't accord in your living standards with those that are laid down as they perceive the Quran, you can be hanged from a crane or tossed off a building. You can be executed, you can be flogged, you can be treated barbarically because the religion has absolute control. Look at the early days of Mormonism in Utah, where they ran rampant with polygamy. They treated their members, in some instances, barbarically. They introduced slavery of not only Black Americans, but also of Indians. That's what happens when religious freedom is given its head. But here we are in democratically elected liberal governments seeing religions behave in this way. And what's to stop them just saying, look, we've had enough of you. If you're talking about curtailment, we'll start curtailing. We'll start cutting away your freedoms, because what freedom you have, you abuse and use ridiculously. I can give one anecdote. I was in a meeting of a number of religious leaders. It was across the board, so we were, I think, lucky to be there, but I was representing the church. In a meeting in Canberra hosted by the Australian Christian Lobby, and it was looking at the legislation that was being propounded to permit same-sex marriage, to which every one of these churches objected. And I said, well, the strategy that you're proposing has a flaw, and the flaw is that there's no plan B. You need to be in discussion with those that you are creating as enemies, so that if the legislation goes through, or if the reforms go through, your rights can still be preserved on a basis with which you're comfortable. The response was, no plan B. We're going to win.
Yeah. There's never a safety net. They don't need it. Which is a really interesting strategy.
I'm perplexed. See, I said before that I was in favour of a Bill of Rights. And when discussions really got serious in the early 2000s about a Bill of Rights, I was saying to religious adherents, we need to join in on the discussion. We need to be at the table on the ground floor so that what comes out of this movement is something that we can live with because we have participated with it in discussion from its very inception, instead of standing aloof and just waiting till it all comes out and then complaining about it. They've never adopted that strategy. It's always opposition, 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 rather than cooperation and assistance.
Yep, we see that with temple building, don't we, Landon, where there's no interaction or working with neighbors, working with town councils, working with planning and zoning. It's just, here's what we want to do. Oh, you won't do it. Oh, now we're going to take action.
The behavior I've seen over and over is this feeling that my religious beliefs override everybody else's beliefs of any kind because mine come from God, and therefore I can't make room for you because yours don't come from God, only mine come from God. And if you just flip that and thought, how would you feel if when you went to church, let's say that they said, Mormons, when you go to the county building, you can't use the bathroom. Someone has to escort you. You would flip out. You would say, you have violated my religious freedoms. Well, that's the same thing these people are saying, is you're violating my human rights. These are God-given rights to, that I be treated like a human. But we see that over and over. My religion trumps any law in the land because it's God.
Dead correct. Absolutely correct. And that's the difficulty. You see, 95% of all litigation, maybe even higher, ends in compromise. And quite often the compromise, because it comes too late, comes at great expense. But if we can realise early that everything will be resolved ultimately either against your will or with your participation, I'd rather participate in the resolution than have it imposed upon me.
Yep, very well said. That's exactly right. Were you going to say something, Landon? Sorry, we can go to our next slide. Okay.
No, I was just agreeing that, and I look at look at Fairview. That the council came back and said, here's some compromises: 60 feet high on the steeple, 42 foot on the roof line, or you can take the very design you have and move it into the commercial district, and it would be approved. So here's options. Here's compromise. But the church is, nope, we're taking this all the way. We're using RLUIPA. We're forcing this, and there is no, we'll lower the spire 15 feet. That's a compromise, which is ridiculous.
Yeah. So this is in that letter, they encourage the Latter-day Saints to go to the link there to learn the church's stand on religious freedom. And there's a big section in the handbook and on the church's website about it. But the first paragraph says, religious freedom is a fundamental human right that protects the conscience of all people. It allows us to think, express, and act upon what we deeply believe. But around the world and in the United States, this freedom is eroding. Churches, religious organizations, and individuals face increasing restrictions as they participate in the public square, express their beliefs, or serve in society. But there is much good that the church members and people of goodwill can do to preserve and strengthen religious freedom. So right out of the gate, they're saying, you're being attacked again. You're being attacked. You're in danger, right? And we see this with all these church members in the towns where they're building the temples. They really do think that something terrible is happening, that their rights are being taken away. You can see it, that there's a fear factor there that I think the church is definitely capitalizing on. We saw it especially in Fairview, where letters from church leadership said your children might be attacked at school because of this, because of their religious beliefs. If that's not sort of fear mongering, I don't know what is, and creating a narrative of families going, well, yeah, maybe they are being attacked. It's writing the story, sort of, is the way I see it.
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes.
This just seems to be completely wrong. I mean, can you think of a time where there's ever been more religious freedom in the world than there is
No.
now?
Yeah.
Well, let me say something in defense of what they're saying there with respect to the United Kingdom. I think there are some laws that are being implemented and enforced in the UK that seem to have gone uh, over the brink, where people are being incarcerated for posting things that are considered to be extreme views. Now, whether they're religious or political or whatever, it doesn't matter. But there are some dangerous laws out there in the UK at the moment, and there's no constitutional shelter from those laws. But I don't know whether it's as bad as the religious right press would present it. But one has to be vigilant on any freedom.
Mhm.
And so that's a fair call. But in Australia, for example, and I would say probably in the United States, probably anywhere else, you can be a Mormon, you can be a Jew, you can be whatever you like, and you have the right and the freedom to exercise your religious beliefs as you see fit. And it's always subject to the law and the good order of society. So if your religious belief is that blue-eyed babies could be garroted at birth, there's going to be a limitation on that. That's going to be stopped. But if your religious belief is that I'm going to go to a building I call the temple, I'm going to engage in all sorts of hokery-pokery there that is weird and incomprehensible, but I won't affect anybody, you'll be perfectly free to do that in this country and in the United Kingdom, in Canada, in New Zealand, in America. You will be free to do that. So, what do we mean by religious freedom? If you want to do strange things that affect the public order, that vilify people, that stir up hatred, then maybe the boundaries there need to be more carefully defined, but there will be limits on your expression. But if you're just going about doing your everyday religious stuff, behaving like a model citizen, you've got nothing to worry about at all.
Yeah, that's exactly what I've seen. Being from Utah, I almost see the opposite of this because you cannot run for office in most counties in Utah if you're not LDS.
And
It's not
win. You can
outlawed, but
run, but you could
you
never
can
win.
run, but you can't win because, and if you're an ex-Mormon or a post-Mormon or someone who's left Mormondom, oh my gosh, you would be, you would not stand a chance because, no one would vote for you because of the fact that you don't have the same religious belief or your religious belief is contrary to their religious belief. And so, coming from Utah, I see almost the exact opposite of what's being said here. I know that doesn't apply generally across the globe, but that's certainly the feeling that anyone from Utah who is not of the prominent faith would feel. And I took a look at, I was looking through my ballot just recently when I voted in the primaries, and I think there was 27 people running. Every one of them was LDS from what I could tell. They don't say they're LDS, but they put the little things in there, BYU, graduated BYU,
Yeah.
served mission. They have a picture of them and their 27 kids, those kind of things. But I went through and I'm going, every single person here is LDS
Yeah.
running.
Well, that's going back to what I was saying, I think, about when religions have a monopoly, how do they behave? Well, one thing they do is they discriminate
Yep.
Mhm. Mhm.
actively against people who are not of their faith. Whenever they get the chance, they try to close it down to make sure that no one who is outside of their believing structure gets a chance. So they are not exactly non-discriminatory when they get their full head on religious freedom. Their religious freedom is what I want rather than what is good for everybody else.
Yeah, and it's funny to me that religions seem to get this exemption. Like we just said, you've got exemptions in your clause that religious organizations can discriminate. You turn that around, where does a secularist ever get to say, you get to discriminate against a religionist? You don't. They
You
have,
don't.
yes, they have the privileges. They have the extra protections that other people do not have.
And that raises the very question as to why religion itself should be privileged in any way with respect to tax laws, with respect to discrimination, with respect to anything, planning laws, whatever. Why should they get privileges that others don't? When most people would say that they're praying to this mythical ghost in the sky that doesn't exist, and that gives them somehow privilege over everybody else. It doesn't square with modern thinking. And if religions want to lose that privileged position, they just have to behave in the way that we're seeing here, which is complaining about the things that don't need to be complained about when the status quo is being preserved and, in fact, being enhanced as far as their existing freedoms.
Yeah, just because they believe in a myth. That's what Landon and I say all the time when we see examples of it. We're like, just because that person believes in a myth, that person gets that special treatment. It's very interesting. And to me, it's problematic where I see more and more talks or articles within the church saying that the church is God, right? I mean, they allude to that, but they're really coming out and saying that whatever the church tells you to do is what God is telling you to do. And that results in a whole other breed of people that cannot see another point of view at all, because it is God telling them to do everything the church is saying. So I see it escalating, but then on the other hand, I see the rise of what they call the nuns, right? Not nuns, but NONES, where people are not religious. They do not believe in a myth. The problem is because they don't have anything to bind them together. I think, the myth binds you. You're a group, you're a body. You can act as a body. We see that in the residents of the towns where they're building the temples. With the push of a button, the church can activate thousands and thousands of members to write letters and emails and show up wearing certain color shirts. The residents there, just regular people living their lives, they can't do that. They don't have this collective conscience. So they try to rally people. They canvass, they go next door, they put up signs. They can never match what people that all are joined together with this myth, this mythology, can accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely. And the odd thing to me is that in Europe, where high proportion of each of the societies is atheistic, they are quite zealous about protecting religious freedom through their legislative processes. Now, religions don't always get their own way. The courts decide both ways, and sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. But they keep those laws in place, even though most people have no religious belief or inclination whatsoever.
So it's a value. It's a value that even those who do not practice religion have. It's a value. That's interesting.
Yeah, and I agree with that, because
Yes.
I'm like, I wouldn't want to take anyone's right to practice their religion. I just don't want to give them privilege.
Right.
I think they should pay taxes. If I join a bowling league and go bowling on Sunday, I have to pay taxes, and the bowling alley has to pay taxes. How come if you go to a church and sing hymns and give talks, you don't have to pay taxes to do your
Exactly.
Sunday activity? I don't think you should be privileged, but I don't think you should in any way be hindered from doing that either. And I would, I served in the military for exactly that reason. I felt like I need to protect those freedoms that we have. I felt I was protecting freedoms, not privilege, and that's where
Yeah.
I come to the issue.
That's a really good
Well,
point.
I think we're all in violent agreement on that, aren't we?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we're nodding ferociously. I think we have 2 more slides. Let's see. The next one talks about how the other faiths, and this talks about that letter that they all wrote, weigh in, but I felt it was a slightly different focus than what the LDS were trying to say. And I felt that it had more to do with let's see. Landon, can you read that really quick?
Yeah, I can.
This is talking about the open letter that the church referenced, saying that they were in support of, written by other faith leaders.
Yeah, an open letter to Queensland Premier Stephen Miles, signed by 17 signatories representing leaders of the Christian, Muslim, and Jewish religions, has warned the state government that proposed changes to anti-discrimination laws will significantly undermine the freedom of faith organizations to employ persons in accordance with their ethos.
Yeah, so their focus is more because they don't have in their churches a place that you go where you're excluded. I mean, to the extent that the LDS church does, right? Their focus seems to be more on the employment that we were discussing before. So go ahead.
Signatories to the letter include Brisbane Catholic Archbishop Mark Coleridge, Council of Imams Queensland Chair Yosef Peer, and Jewish Board of Deputies Jason Steinberg. Their letter states the legal changes will disallow faith communities and schools from selecting staff who would uphold one of the core purposes of a faith community or school, that of maintaining a culture and ethos consistent with the requirements of that faith. The government is now considering feedback received during a consultation period of only 1 month. HRLA provided a submission in which we argued that the draft bill strongly preferences non-discrimination rights at the expense of fundamental rights of religious liberty and associated freedoms of conscience, speech, and association, and is therefore fundamentally flawed. The amended law would allow Christian organizations to hire Christian staff, but only for roles in which teaching observances or practices of religion is a genuine occupational requirement. There is a presumption under this test that no such occupational requirement exists when hiring, for example, a math or science teacher. This approach demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of religious freedom laws in Australia. The reality is that many faith organizations and educational institutions aim to foster a culture of faith, which requires hiring staff members who not only possess the necessary technical skills, but who can demonstrate a willingness to support and uphold the beliefs and ethos of the organization.
Well, my comment on that is twofold. First of all, yes, it's on a different point entirely than what the church is trying to buy into in terms of the temple. It's really relating to schools and the things that matter to these faiths that run schools. Secondly, my response is to these schools, too bad. So what? I just think, sure, they want to maintain their ethos, and there's been some litigation on that. There's a German case, Egenberger, from a few years ago, which was precisely on this point. And look, if you can demonstrate that the maths teacher has to be a member in order to maintain the ethos of your community, and you can do that in a reasonable and proportionate way, then you'll be able to maintain that discriminatory practice. If you can't, then too bad. You don't meet the threshold, and they don't understand that religious freedom is subject to the law and to public order, and that if the law and public order say that you should have a diversity of teachers in a religious community, provided they're not the ones that influence the faith directly, then that is the law and you should abide by it and stop complaining about it. I think this is an extreme position. It's another example of where, in the end, religious fanatical positions are just going to get on the public's nerves and on government's nerves, and they're going to say, look, why should we listen to you? Because you're just not reasonable. There is nothing unreasonable to my mind that the maths or science teachers should be employed without discriminatory practice. But I know others disagree with that, and my position is probably the other side of what they would want to propound. But that's an argument that can be had both ways. And if you think that it's very important that your teacher be LDS, for example, to teach at BYU or wherever it might be, okay, then demonstrate why this unity of ethos is so important to the integrity of your school. If you can't demonstrate that, then you have to employ any teacher that is suitably qualified, irrespective of their religious belief. I I I read that and I say, well, so what? Um, I don't think that's a very impressive argument. And to say that somebody misunderstands the fundamental nature of religious freedom laws in Australia as being your position, it's not a very good way to start. I mean, if somebody told me that I don't know much about the law and I better listen to them, I'm not sure how closely I would listen to them. I think, in fact, the letter as captionized there is insulting because they haven't grasped the fundamental issues that you can't have your own way all the time. You're getting a lot of concession out of a government and a society that doesn't necessarily want to give you any concessions. So take what you've got and do it with a grace that is consistent with your religious belief rather than running contrary to it.
Yeah, there's already privilege, like we discussed, and this just draws attention. The more you beat that drum, you already have privilege. What are you trying to get this for, too? But so you're saying in this scenario, this is true. Like, but this already existed before. It's not something new that they're
I
claiming.
know. I think this is a reform.
You think this is a reform? Okay.
Yeah, I think this is a reform but it is a reform that is consistent with what laws throughout other parts of the world provide. So I think this is a modernization, and I think it's an appropriate modernization.
Right.
The other modernization that needs to be examined is whether they can say to students, because they're gay or because they're lesbian or whatever it might be, that they can expel them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's been a hot debate. I don't pretend to be fully across that. That's not really my area of expertise or interest. I'm not saying I'm not interested in it, but I don't have sufficient ability to comment on it. But um, as a as a just a standing position, I would say that religious communities need to be very careful about where they want to be inclusive and where they want to be exclusive. And I always go back to the example of Jesus himself. When when he gave the Sermon on the Mount, one of the famous excerpts from the Sermon on the Mount is, go the extra mile. But very few people understand exactly what going the extra mile means. Going the extra mile was actually based upon an element of Roman occupational law. When the Romans occupied a territory, any citizen of that territory could be compelled carry a legionnaire's backpack weighing about 40 kilos, a Roman mile, for the legionnaire. So you could be press ganged out of a crowd, and you, Rebecca, could be forced to carry 40 kilos on your back and carry it for a mile for that legionnaire. Give him a break from carrying that pack. What Jesus said when he said go the extra mile, he was saying not only do you carry out the compulsory mile, but you go an extra mile to show your faith and your love of others and of God. So, you think about that. You hate these Roman soldiers. You hate these people that are occupying your territory. You hate these people that are oppressing you. What does Jesus say? Do good to those that hate you. Carry the pack an extra mile, not just the compulsory mile. And what did Jesus say about taxes? He said, look, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and unto God that which is God's. This is what Caesar is saying you need to do. So do it. Don't complain about it. Because it's anti-biblical to be saying, we don't even want to go the 1 mile, let alone the extra mile.
Yeah, this has made me think of a couple of things. First off, let's flip it again. Let's say that I started a private school that was based on science, charter school, whatever, but it's based on science. And I'm hiring a football coach. And Sataki comes and applies to be a football coach at my science school. Can I say, no, you believe in creationism, therefore you can't be my football coach?
Mm-hmm.
Every one of us would say that is wrong. You are not allowed to do that. But you flip it and it's like, no, you have to believe in our religion to be the football coach.
Perfect example.
Yeah.
Perfect example. I think you're expressing agreement with my propositions yet again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so. Then I have to ask myself, why are they so protective that you have to have that belief? And I think it's to maintain control over their membership. We see that at BYU. If you're a BYU professor and you say, I don't believe this anymore, you're not free to express that or to leave the religion, or you won't have a job anymore. So when they tie your job to your belief becomes much stronger, because that's how you get your paycheck. You have to keep that there, and to me, that's a manipulation tactic. It's not a freedom of anything when you're trying to force people to believe something that they don't believe in order to keep their job.
Landon, you've hit the nail on the head. That's absolutely correct. That's a principle in philosophy, of course, the principle of mutuality. You test the validity of any proposition by doing exactly what you've said, which is reverse it. That's very Kantian philosophy, and I completely agree with it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's this fear that the membership should not be exposed to any other point of view, to remain in a silo. I remember an old church video. I love old church videos like that you would check out from the Meeting House Library, and I think it was called Summer of Decision. I can't remember exactly, but it was about a young man who went to state college for a semester, and boy, he came back with a goatee. He had some ideas, some things that he was not supposed to know about, right? He had left the church school and he'd gone to state college. Don't ever go to state college. So there's this idea that, you've got to have your professors and teachers on board with the party line. There can't be any other kinds of ideas, because these vulnerable students who've never been exposed to anything else, they might be unduly influenced. So it could be something like that. Don't go to state college. That's the rule.
And you'll see in some of the edicts of the current prophet where he says, when you're having doubts, don't talk to those who already doubt. Okay.
Yeah.
So he's censoring the conversations you can have, the things you can read. You can only read faith promoting works. You can only speak to people who will promote your faith. They've got that ridiculous aphorism, doubt your doubts. I've never worked out how you doubt a doubt. But they just want you to stay insular from anything that might challenge. I would have thought that if the religion's worth its salt, you'd want it to be challenged.
Exactly.
You'd want the kids to have a thought about it and to challenge it and find that it stands up, rather than sheltering them and not letting them know that it maybe doesn't stand up. And so if it doesn't stand up, then it's not worth having, is it, as a belief?
Yeah, it's the scientific method. Try it. I mean, nobody wants to fly an airplane until they test the laws of physics and make sure that, you want to make sure they stand up before you jump in that airplane.
Well, the truth is like a lion. Let it out and it will defend itself, right? That's a very popular meme. But I think maybe the strategy is to keep people siloed and then to just inoculate from within, tiny little doses of some half truths, disguising a bigger problematic truth. So, you kind of are okay. You've heard about it a little bit, but it's never too disturbing to you. I see that kind of in the seminary program. I see that in things that they're teaching teenagers where you're like, oh, I know about that, but you don't really know about that. You know of that. So inoculation really works. And I think they started doing that maybe 15 or 20 years ago, and probably right around the time the internet the internet exploded on the scene, and I think inoculation is more the plan. So let's see. Okay, this last slide I think is just, you can read this too, Landon, just some of the things that the faith leaders in the area are claiming, and I'm sure you can speak to this then, Neville, that are claiming that happened with this bill. And it's funny because when I read through all this, I really did get the impression that it was brand new. It was kind of sprung on everybody, right? Instead of something that had been in the works for years and years. So it is very alarmist. You want to read this, Landon? This is what the faith leaders are complaining and saying, this is what you're doing to us.
Yeah. In June, the government withdrew its controversial anti-discrimination legislation and hastily replaced it with the Respect at Work and Other Matters Amendment Bill. Because this bill was written so quickly, it has significant errors that would seriously impact faith communities. A ban on hateful conduct so broad that it could silence religious debate and disagreement. Laws against harassment on the basis of sex, which could include simple disagreement about sexuality and gender. A positive duty to prevent this harassment could see faith-based institutions and schools forced to teach against their beliefs. Religious exemptions do not cover this new legislation, so religious speech and faith-based institutions are not protected. In July, a wide range of Queensland faith leaders sent a letter to Premier Stephen Miles asking him to fix the problems with the new Respect at Work bill. The Premier referred the letter to the Attorney General, Yvette Dath, so a second letter asked for a meeting to discuss our concerns. Faith leaders also wrote a detailed submission to the parliamentary committee looking into the bill. The submission detailed our concerns and provided ample amendments that would have fixed the problems without interfering with the goals of the legislation. In August, the Attorney General's office replied saying that due to a heavily committed schedule, the Attorney General is unable to meet, and the faith leader's letter has been forwarded to the department for a written response to be provided in due course. The following day, the parliamentary committee released the report, which failed to reference the faith leader submission even once or to take our concerns into consideration.
So they're very concerned.
Well, in this case, I have to say there's probably some mild justification for their concern. They've gone to a lot of trouble to put their concerns out there, and I think they've been given fairly short shrift by the government in not taking their concerns on board in any way. I mean, that's probably a fair call on the part of the faith leaders that one of the people there is the Archbishop of Sydney, and I know him quite well. He's a very clever man. He taught at Oxford University. I think he's either got a PhD or a DPhil. I can't remember what it is, but he's a very smart man. He's legally trained, and he doesn't make statements idly, in my experience. So maybe I haven't studied this particular set of assertions in any detail, so I don't want to be unfair to anyone by giving a fixed opinion. But I would say that it may, if the Archbishop of Sydney has been involved, it's worthy of some serious consideration because he's a very astute and clever man and doesn't usually say things just for the sake of saying them. Going to those bullet points that are in the slide, hateful conduct is an expression that I really deprecate because what does it mean? It means one thing to one person and another thing to another person. And what it does, depending on how the legislation is framed, it can put the interpretation of hateful conduct in the judgment of the recipient rather than an objective assessment. So it is a dangerous and a very loose phrase, and it ought not to be used. I'm not sure about the second bullet point, but the positive duty, how are you going to know what that means? If I am teaching a religious class on the creation and I say, of course, there are other views that are based in science, that you may want to check out and understand. But for this class, we're going to stick to Genesis. Does that discharge that positive duty? Or do I need to go in and give a second class on Darwinism? I don't know. I think, and they're right too, that the religious exemptions need to at least address, if not cover, the new legislation. So I think these are very likely legitimate concerns that need to be dealt with appropriately and not just sent to some government functionary to consider, because they are up against an intellectual heavyweight. In the case of the Archbishop of Sydney, he needs to be treated respectfully, and so do the others, given that they've gone to the trouble of putting this forward. So I think out of all the claims that we've been talking about, this is probably in that area that I'm talking about, where legitimate concerns can be raised, but don't cry wolf. I don't think this is necessarily crying wolf, but I haven't studied it.
What do you think, Landon?
I was a little confused by this because they talk about is the Respect at Work and Other Matters Amendment bill, is that the same bill that we were just talking about that had all of that? Or are they saying they withdrew that bill and they put this other bill in its place?
There are three bills in question here. There's the anti-discrimination bill that we've been talking about. Then there is an earlier Respect at Work and Other Matters bill, which was withdrawn, and then there is the current one. But they are distinct. In other words, the Respect at Work and Other Matters Amendment bill interrelates with the anti-discrimination law, but exactly what that interrelation is, I can't tell you at the moment. I'm sorry.
Well, I think the bottom line is, because I think we're done with our slides, the church, its worst case scenario is they're going to have to shut down the Brisbane temple. You can no longer have temple recommend interviews. Nobody can enter. You could never hire anybody at any of their institutions, that you would have to stop your exclusionatory hiring, saying that even the admin had to be LDS, and cats and dogs living together is the end of the world. But I think we're finding out here on the podcast that is not the case. But unfortunately, they've kind of alluded that to members who might be really worried.
Right. That's right. But look, I have no problem with any religious body raising a legitimate concern, but when they just raise concerns that are counterfactual and contrary to the text that we can find, that's irresponsible. That's irresponsible treatment of the membership at large, who just don't have the resources, intellectually or otherwise, to question those things. And if they were to find out that those things are not true, where is that going to leave them in respect to their faith?
Yeah, but everybody likes to feel persecuted, I think. It kind of binds you together. It binds groups together. And sometimes I think, I don't know, I have this weird theory about all the temple building. And other people have said this too, that, maybe the church encourages this sense of persecution so that people can feel that, it definitely does bind you together. We've heard our entire lives about the persecution. It's almost like, oh, good, finally now I get to sense some of this and I get to stand up and I get to do my part, in a world where you're no longer, there's not a mob after you, I don't know.
That's right. That's exactly correct. That's a correct potential interpretation of what they're doing. It's hard to think that there is no guiding mind behind all this that actually knows what's going on and is, in any event, pushing these agendas that don't need to be pushed.
Well, there must be a method behind the madness. I feel like there is, and we get little tidbits of information that kind of allude to what we were discussing before the show, with the temple building, at least, taking these to higher courts, these decisions, to get some definitive, authoritative, final, decisive, some kind of something, going forward for the next how many years. So I don't know. That sounds like an evil plot to me, doesn't it to you, Landon? Kind of
well, like
evil genius behind the scenes doing that.
Yeah, well, I've always noticed that, you never get people sitting around talking about, the good old days when they got to persecute everybody else. They always
Yes.
talk about the times they're persecuted, you don't hear it. Wasn't that great when we got to burn witches and stretch them on the Iron Maidens and that? No, nobody does that. They always
No.
talk about the time their people were
Right.
persecuted, and I think maybe that's human nature, but it's certainly Mormon nature. I know that for sure.
Yeah.
Well, can I just make one other comment as somebody outside of Utah and outside of the States? And that is a lot of church policy seems to be driven by Americentric
Mhm.
considerations. And look, let's say that they do take this case on the temple up to the Supreme Court and get the decision they want. Courts throughout the rest of the world are not going to take any notice of that
Hmm.
because the First Amendment is specifically an American piece of jurisprudence. It's not followed anywhere else in the world um, because it's on a specific set of wording that is in your constitution that isn't imitated anywhere else. So it's short-sighted in a way. They say they want to be an international church, but they keep on behaving like they want to be a colonist church and colonize the American way throughout the world. But no one's going to accept that. And if SCOTUS decides a First Amendment case in the way that they might hope, um, it's not going to have any credibility anywhere else.
And wouldn't it actually hurt the church, because you'd see these other countries if they were to start building all these huge edifices that they're building in these neighborhoods, that they might step back and say that ain't going to happen in our. We know
Exactly.
I
what
think that
these guys
happens
are doing.
already. No,
Yeah.
I think that does happen already. And I think we've learned from Nemo, who talked about the Brisbane, no, not Brisbane. Now I'm in Australia. What's the temple that Nemo talked about, Landon, where they're building?
Uh,
Is it
Bristol.
Nemo's going
Yeah,
to kill us for not
Bristol.
remembering.
Yeah, I think it's Bristol.
Anyway, the point is, in America, in the United States, the church knows it has all this privilege and protection, and they treat the towns like that. They send the letter, they send RLUIPA, they send the lawyer, you're going to do it. Such a difference. Nemo, when we were on his program, he read some letters, oh, please come to this open house. Oh, of course we'll move that. Oh, yeah, just they know that they have to play ball over there. They know the codes are different. They know that they're not going to put up with it. Here in the United States, it's like, nope, here you go. This is what you got to do. So there's a difference in the way they behave, and there's a difference in the way that they're perceived. And I would think other countries would take note. I know that even other cities take note. In the case of Heber, Utah, Heber Valley, they changed everything on the county level. Midway, the city right next to Heber, just recently locked down all of its zoning, all of its codes, everything, saying this is not going to happen in my town. We're locking it down. Cody, Wyoming just did something similar, even though, of course, they've lost the battle on the temple. They, for going forward, learn from that, locked it down. I feel like other countries might kind of look at it and go, that might work there, but it's not going to work here.
Good point.
Yeah. Kind of interesting. So, wow. Well, I think that we've learned everything we can learn about this Australian situation. When is this? Does it go to a vote? What happens? What's the process? What going forward?
I don't know what the legislative program looks like, because Queensland's coming up to an election. So it's very likely that the current government will lose office. They're very unpopular. And so this legislation, if it's not passed before the state election, it may not even see the light of day after the election. I don't know. So we may be talking about something that never becomes law. But if they are going to pass it, they can pass it very quickly because they have the numbers to do so.
That's very interesting. I guess we'll just have to wait and watch and see. Do you have any final comments, Landon? I think we've covered it very well.
I just want to thank Dr. Rochow for coming on the show, and for your expertise, and for walking us through and explaining the unique Australian aspect of how things are done.
Well, can I just say it's been an absolute privilege and joy to be working with you today. You're very well informed and you've got incisive questions, and I thank you very much for this opportunity.
Oh, you are so welcome. We'll definitely have you back. There are lots of issues like this that your expertise absolutely can lend itself because, I find in the nuanced or post-Mormon community, people are so curious, right? They're so smart and so curious in these kinds of issues. They really do want to understand more. And so we get emails and we get texts and we get messages all the time from people saying, hey, what about this? And have you seen this letter? And could you guys cover this? So this was definitely something that we had several people reach out. And so I think you were the perfect person to have on, and we just appreciate it so much. So
You're very kind. Thank you.
Oh, all right. Everybody comment and let us know. Are you aware of this situation? What do you think? Is the church crying wolf, as we said, saying that all of a sudden they're going to have to shut the temple down and no one's going to be able to go because of this legislation? We'll watch this as it moves forward and we'll let everybody know and keep you informed, but please comment. Please like and subscribe to Mormonish Podcast. And if you'd like to be made aware of when new episodes come out, you can hit that notification bell and it'll tell you when something new is dropped. If you'd like to help financially support Mormonish Podcast, we have links in the show notes to Donor Box. We are a 501(c)(3), just like the church, right? I should start saying that for now on, without the same protections, right, Landon?
That's right.
That's right. That's it. So, but we really appreciate everybody that does, especially those that make those monthly donations. That just makes such a difference to us. And we love you guys. You guys are just awesome. We also have links in our show notes to our merch store. We have fun mugs and water bottles and hats and all the fun stuff. Show your Mormonish pride, right? A victory for Satan. And thank you once again, everybody, for being here. I know, isn't that crazy? I don't know. I've heard this rumor from a source that says the church media department is still sitting on everything Mormon because they feel with the changing of the guard, Mormon will be back with a vengeance. So we'll see. I don't know. That'll be interesting. Anyway, all right, everybody. For now, we are Mormonish Podcast. And thank you once again to everybody. We'll see y'all next time. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Mormonish. We really appreciate our listeners and would love to hear from you if you have a story you'd like to share. You can email us at mormonishpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and on our website, mormonishpodcast.org. And don't forget to look for us on YouTube and like and subscribe. Keep joyful, everybody.